Hello, everyone. Welcome to Z Time. We do zombie stories for survivors. Thanks for listening. On with the tale. I was driving to work when the alerts started coming in. Nothing dramatic. No sirens. Just vague warnings stacked on top of each other. Avoid crowds. Shelter in place. Limited emergency response. I coordinate feed deliveries for a living. I know how quickly systems fail when drivers stop showing up and warehouses close. When hospitals start issuing vague instructions instead of specifics, it means they're already overwhelmed. I didn't call anyone. I didn't wait for confirmation. I turned north. The cabin was already stocked for a week or two. I'd build it for quiet weekends, not the end of anything, but I'd always plan it like I might need to stay longer than intended. Solar, water catchment, no visible utilities, no close neighbors. I made it there before noon. I didn't leave town because of panic. I left because things stopped lining up. I was driving in that familiar morning traffic, half listening to the radio, when the alerts started stacking. Not one big warning, a handful of small ones. Avoid crowds, temporary closures, emergency services delayed. Those messages are never for the public. They're for the system talking to itself after it's already behind. I work logistics. When trucks stop arriving on time, you don't wait for confirmation. You reroute. So I rerouted myself. I didn't go home. I didn't call anyone. I turned north and drove until the buildings thinned out and the cell signals started dropping. By the time I hit the dirt road, the radio was nothing but static and one looping county message that kept cutting off mid-sentence. The cabin sat where it always did, tucked low in the trees like it was trying not to be noticed. I didn't pull straight up to it. I parked down the road, killed the engine, and listened. That part wasn't dramatic. It was just habit. Engines announce you. Silence tells you if someone else is already there. Nothing moved. No voices. No footsteps. No birds taking off all at once. I walked the last stretch in, keeping my eyes on the tree line instead of the cabin itself. Broken branches, disturbed dirt. Anything out of place would have meant someone beat me to it. But the ground looked the same as it had the last time I'd been up. Messy in the natural way, not the human way. Inside, the cabin smelled like wood and dust. Same as always. I locked the door behind me and stood there for a minute, listening again. When nothing happened, I started working. I didn't unpack right away. Comfort can wait. Security can't. I checked the windows first. All intact. No stress cracks. The frames were solid. The roof was fine too. No leaks. No sagging, no shifted panels. The battery bank read healthy, but I left the system off. Reflections in glass travel farther than people think. The cabin sits in a shallow bowl, trees thick on three sides, with a ridge to the east. That ridge blocks the road. Anyone coming in from that direction has to crest it before they see the place, and for a second or two they're outlined against the sky. When I chose this spot, that mattered to me more than the view. I stepped outside and walked the land slow, all the way around, not touching anything yet. I wanted to see how someone else would move through it, where the ground was soft, where the leaves piled up, where animals already cut paths through the underbrush. I wasn't thinking about zombies yet. Zombies are simple. They move towards sound and scent and get stuck on things. Humans are the problem. Humans look for shelter. Humans recognize effort. That's why I didn't build fences. Fences say someone is defending something. They say there's food, power, water, something worth the trouble. I didn't want to look defended. I wanted to look forgotten. So, instead of walls, I made the groundwork against anyone coming in, close to the cabin. I cleared everything down to dirt and gravel. Not smooth, not neat. Just enough that no one could step without being heard. Gravel shifts. Boots crunch. You can't help it. I tested it myself. Try to move quietly, and every step still spoke for me. Farther out, I dragged fallen branches and dead trees into loose, ugly piles. Nothing straight, nothing even, just storm debris, the kind people expect to see in the woods. Zombies don't think about where they put their feet. They trip, they snag, they fall. Humans see the problem immediately, but they can't move fast or quiet through it without risking an injury, and most people won't risk that unless they're desperate. Beyond that, I left the woods alone. No clearing, no signs of work. The forest does a better job hiding me if I don't try to improve it. By the time the sun started dropping, the cabin was harder to reach quietly, but it didn't look any different from the road. That was important. If someone scanned the area, nothing about it would suggest planning. Inside, I reinforced from the inside only. Plywood over the windows, screwed into studs instead of nailed. Nails loosen over time. Screws don't. The door got a removable crossbar anchored into the frame. The bedroom became the fallback. One entrance. Supplies stacked where I could reach them in the dark. A mattress leaned against the wall where bullets or splinters might come through. I still hadn't turned on the lights. Water came next. The rain catchment was intact. Gutters feeding into the tanks. First flush system clean. I filtered a batch and boiled it anyway. Not because I thought it was contaminated, but because habits keep you alive when stress makes you sloppy. That night, I ate cold food and sat in the dark, listening to the woods settle. Wind through leaves. Something small moving near the creek. Normal sounds. The kind you memorize so you know when something doesn't belong. I slept light, but I slept. In the morning, I climbed the ridge to check my phone. I got just enough signal to pull down the last scraps of information before everything went quiet. Hospitals overwhelmed. Guard units moving south. No clear lines, no containment language that stuck. That told me this wasn't a weekend problem. I shut the phone off, pulled the battery, wrapped it, and put it away. Broadcasting where you are is a mistake once people realize help isn't coming. When the first dead wandered through a few days later, they didn't surprise me. I heard them before I saw them, low and uneven, coming through the trees. 3 of them. Former hikers, judging by the packs. They moved badly, got tangled in the deadfall, pushed through without understanding why it was hard. I stayed still. They moved on. That was when I knew the cabin would work. Not because it was strong, but because it didn't give anyone a reason to stay. And that was enough for now. Once the cabin stopped feeling like a place I might lose, I turned to food. Not in a dramatic way. Food isn't dramatic. It's arithmetic. I started by laying everything out on the table. Not to admire it, just to see it all at once. Bags of rice and beans. Canned vegetables. A few cans of meat I'd been saving, because they cost more than they should have. The freezer held venison from last season. Some chicken. A little fish. I counted calories instead of meals. That's the first adjustment people don't make. They think in breakfasts and dinners. I thought in numbers. How many calories per day I needed to keep working, thinking, staying warm. I set the target just under 2,000. Enough to function, not enough to waste. Then I worked backward. Dry goods with a backbone. Rice and beans last forever if you keep them dry and keep rodents out. I moved them into sealed containers immediately. Mice don't show up all at once. They show up when you stop paying attention. Canned food stayed where it was but got reorganized by expiration date. Not because dates mattered anymore, but because rotation mattered. You eat the stuff that can be replaced first. The freezer was the problem. Solar will run a freezer, but only if the weather cooperates. Clouds don't care about your plans. I decided early not to gamble on it. I ran the freezer only during peak sun for a few days while I processed everything inside. That meant work. I thawed the meat in stages, so nothing spoiled. I cooked most of it immediately, salted it, sliced it thin, dried it over a low, smokeless heat. I used a rocket stove set up outside, shielded so no smoke column gave me away. Smoke is a signal flare in the woods. By the end of it, the freezer was empty, powered down, and no longer something I had to worry about. Once stored food was stabilized, I moved on to replacement food. That's where traps come in. I didn't set traps right next to the cabin. Animals that get pressure close to a structure disappear fast. I walked the land again, farther out this time, paying attention to trails. Not the obvious ones. Those get used by everything, but the secondary paths that loop between feeding areas and water. I looked for narrow points where movement naturally funnels tracks crossing soft ground droppings that were fresh, not sun-bleached hair caught on bark or wire fencing remnants. I marked nothing physically. I just memorized. The first traps I set were snares. Simple wire snares anchored solid, set at the right height for rabbits and squirrels. Height matters more than people think. Too high and they duck under. Too low and you catch nothing but frustration. I set them with gloves on, not because animals smell fear, but because they smell oil and metal and human skin. I rubbed dirt into the wire afterward, let it belong. I didn't set many at first, a few along each trail. Overtrapping wipes out the local population fast. You don't want to win today and starve next month. Then came deadfalls. Deadfalls are heavier work, but they don't rely on tension that can fail. I built them slow, stone by stone, testing each one before I armed it. If a trap can trigger on its own, it's a liability. I crushed my hand once years ago, rushing one. I remembered that pain while I worked. Fishing was last. The creek wasn't ideal, too shallow in places, too visible in others, but it was consistent. I set passive line traps overnight. Nothing flashy. No nets. Nets get tangled and stolen. Just baited hooks tied off under overhangs where fish already sheltered. Every trap I set followed the same rule. Check once a day, same time, same route. Routine does two things. It conserves energy and it keeps you from making mistakes when you're tired. Wandering to just check one more thing is how people get lost, injured, or surprised. When the first rabbit hit a snare, I didn't celebrate. I dealt with it. I killed it quickly. Clean. No wasted motion. Dragged it back along a route that didn't cross my other traps. Processed it outside, downwind, washed everything immediately. Blood attracts things I didn't want to investigate in my home. I used everything I could. Meat, organs, bones for broth. Waste went far from the cabin and got buried deep. You don't leave a buffet behind and expect peace. Over time, the system settled. Some days I caught nothing. That was fine. Stored food covered the gap. Other days I caught more than I needed. That got preserved. Dried. Smoked lightly when weather allowed. Stored in cloth so moisture didn't build. I never ate the same thing every day. Nutritional gaps don't show up right away. They show up when it's too late to fix them. What surprised me wasn't how much work it was. It was how quiet it became. Once the traps were set and the routine locked in, food stopped being a daily crisis. It became background noise. Something that happened while I listened for footsteps that didn't belong or watched the tree line for movement that didn't match the wind. That's when I understood something important. The cabin wasn't keeping me alive. The systems were. And as long as I respected them, didn't rush, didn't overreach, didn't get greedy, they kept working for a while. The first time I dealt with another person up close, I was checking traps. That alone was a mistake. Though I didn't realize it yet, I had fallen into rhythm by then. Same time every morning, same route, same order. It saves energy, but it also creates predictability. I knew that. I'd known it for years. I just didn't think anyone was watching. The snare line ran along a shallow cut in the land, a natural funnel between two thick stand of pine. I crouched to check the wire, already half thinking about the next trap, when I heard a sound that didn't belong. A footstep, not the careless weight shift of an animal, not the dragging shuffle of the dead. It was measured, intentional, someone adjusting balance. I didn't look right away. Looking is movement, and movement draws eyes. I froze and listened, breathing, controlled, but close, too close. I raised my hand slowly, palms out, and spoke before turning. Not loud, not aggressive. Morning. Silence stretched. That's always the worst part. Silence means someone is deciding. When he answered, his voice was rough, tired, didn't mean to sneak up on you. That was a lie. People don't accidentally sneak. I turned a few degrees, just enough to see him without squaring my body. Mid-30s, maybe. Beard grown wrong, not maintained. Rifle held low, but ready. Finger indexed along the guard. He knew what he was doing, at least a little. He wasn't alone. I could hear another person behind me. Slight movement in the brush. Trying to be quiet, failing just enough to give themselves away. 2 on 1. They had the angle. I kept my hands up. You're on my trap line. He glanced at the wire at my feet. That's when his eyes changed. Recognition. Not fear, interest. Didn't know anyone was still out here, he said. Another lie. They'd followed me. I took a slow step back, careful not to cross the snare. Not many are. The second man stepped into view. Younger, nervous, shotgun, muzzle a little too high. That worried me more than the first one. Nervous people make fast mistakes. They asked the usual questions. Was I alone? How long I'd been here? What I had? I answered only what I couldn't avoid, and even then I kept it vague. Yes, a while. Enough. I didn't mention the cabin. Didn't mention stored food. Didn't mention solar or water or anything that sounded permanent. People don't rob you because they're evil. They rob you because the math makes sense. I needed to change the math. I lowered my hand slowly and reached for my jacket pocket. I told them what I was doing before I did it. Surprises get you shot. I pulled out a piece of dried meat, held it out, not tossing it, offering it. Take it, I said. I'm not looking for trouble. The older one hesitated. Hunger is louder than pride. He took it. That was the moment I pushed. You've been watching me, I said, not accusing, just stating it. You know, I don't carry much when I'm out here. You know I walk light. They didn't answer. You also know, I continued, that means what I'm protecting isn't on me. Silence again. The younger one shifted. I could hear his breath speed up. I let the idea hang. I didn't threaten. Threats force action. I just let them imagine what moving forward would cost. Finally, the older man nodded once. Fair. They backed off slowly, eyes on me the whole time. When they turned, I waited until the brush swallowed them before I moved. I didn't finish checking the traps that day. I took a different route home, wide and slow, watching reflections and listening for anything that didn't match the woods. When I reached the cabin, I didn't go inside right away. I circled it twice, checking the ground, checking the deadfall. That night, I changed everything. I shifted trap times, moved lines, set false trails that led nowhere. I started carrying less food and more awareness, because the real danger wasn't that they'd found me. It was that they now knew I existed and that I had something worth surviving for. The second encounter didn't happen by accident. That's how I know it was different. It came 3 days after the first meeting, which told me they hadn't just passed through. They'd stayed close enough to watch. I'd already changed my routine by then, different trap routes, different times, but I hadn't gone far enough. I'd underestimated how quickly people learn when they're hungry. I was back at the cabin just after dusk. That was mistake number one. Dusk feels safer than night, but it's the worst time to move. Light fades unevenly. Shapes lie. I heard the sound before I saw anything. Metal clicking against stone. Not loud. Not accidental. Someone testing footing. I froze inside the doorway, half in, half out, and listened. My heart rate went up, but my hand stayed steady. Panic makes noise. Stillness buys you seconds. Then I saw a movement at the edge of the clearing. Not the dead. Too deliberate. A crouched silhouette, keeping low, using the deadfall I'd built as cover. They'd studied it. That told me this wasn't a scouting pass. This was a commitment. I stepped back inside and closed the door without locking it. Locked doors create a single problem. Unlocked doors create choices. I moved to the window slit. I cut behind the plywood and waited. The first man appeared in the inner zone. Same older one from before. Rifle up now. No pretense. He moved slowly, testing the gravel, clearly annoyed by the noise it made. Behind him, I could hear the second man circling wide, trying to flank. That one mistake, splitting up, was the only reason I'm still here. I waited until the younger one stepped into the noise trap line. Cans rattled. Not enough to scare them. Enough to fix their position. I fired once. Not a warning shot. Not at the head. Center mass, where movement stops. He went down hard, screaming. The sound ripped through the trees like a flare. The older man spun toward him, rifle swinging wide. I fired again, this time into the dirt near his feet. He stumbled backward, lost footing on the gravel, and fell. I didn't rush. Rushing gets you killed. I kept the rifle trained and moved forward just enough to see clearly. The younger one was alive but bleeding badly. Leg hit. Ephemeral, judging by the speed of it. He wasn't getting up. The older man raised his hands. Slowly. He knew the math now. Don't, he said. We just wanted food. I believed him. That didn't change anything. You came at night, I said. You split up. You tested my ground. He didn't argue. I backed him away from the cabin first. Distance matters. I made him drop the rifle. Kick it aside. Turn around. Walk. He kept looking back at the younger man. Help him, he said. Please. I didn't answer. When he was far enough that I could break contact safely, I told him to keep walking and not look back again. He did. I stood there a long time after they were gone, listening to the screaming fade into the woods and then into nothing. I didn't go near the body. Dead or alive, it was a magnet for trouble. I waited until morning before moving again. That day, I dismantled half my perimeter and rebuilt it differently. Wider, less predictable. I buried blood-soaked soil deep and moved the cabin's visual signature again. I stopped using that section of the land entirely. The dead came later, drawn by the noise I'd made. They tangled in the branches and stayed there, trapped, moaning for days until silence returned. That was the cost. From then on, I stopped thinking of the cabin as mine. It was a position, and positions get tested. I knew I'd been noticed long before I saw them. You don't kill someone in the woods, even quietly, even efficiently, and expect the consequences to stay local. Sound travels. Stories travel faster. And people who survive long enough to form groups don't ignore patterns. They look for them. The first sign wasn't voices or gunfire. It was absence. For 3 days after the shooting, the woods went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. No small game near the creek. No birds settling near dusk. Even the dead stopped wandering through like they had before. That happens when pressure moves through an area and everything else clears out. Something larger had entered the equation. I adjusted immediately. No more routine checks. No more daily trap rounds. I stayed inside the inner zone unless I had a reason not to. And when I did move, I moved slow and indirect. I stopped cooking outside entirely. Cold meals only. No scent plume. On the 4th day, I spotted them. Not close. Not careless. 3 figures on a ridge at dawn. Just silhouettes against a lightening sky. They didn't crest it fully. Just enough to observe. Binoculars, judging by the way one of them kept adjusting their hands. They stayed maybe 2 minutes, then disappeared. That told me everything. They weren't scavengers. Scavengers rush. These people were mapping. I didn't fire. I didn't move. I let the cabin look dead. By mid-afternoon, they came again, this time wider, lower, moving through the trees instead of the ridge. I counted 5. Spread out, spacing consistent, weapons carried properly. One of them stopped near where the younger man had fallen days earlier and crouched, examining the ground. Blood leaves stories. You can bury it, dilute it, scatter it, but you can't erase it completely. They didn't approach the cabin that day. They withdrew before dark. That night, I didn't sleep. At first light, I heard engines. 2 of them, ATVs, kept low, but not quiet enough to hide what they were. They stopped well short of the cabin, somewhere near the old logging spur east of the ridge. Doors opened. Voices controlled calm, not shouting. I counted 8, maybe 10. That's when I understood what I was dealing with. They hadn't come to scavenge. They'd come to claim. I stayed inside, watching through slit. The first contact came mid-morning. One man walked forward alone, hands visible, rifle slung. Confident posture. Leader or acting like one. "Whoever's holding this place," he called, voice caring but not aggressive. "We know you're here." I didn't answer. He kept talking anyway. They always do. Said they were organized. Said they controlled several miles in each direction. Said cooperation was smarter than conflict. He never threatened directly. He didn't have to. The presence did that for him. While he talked, I watched the others. 2 were moving wide, trying to find angles. One was watching the woods behind them instead of me. That one bothered me. Then I heard it, moaning, far off at first, then closer. Gunfire draws the dead like blood draws insects. The shooting days earlier had seeded the area, and now movement, engines, voices had finished the job. The man talking heard it too. He paused mid-sentence. From the tree to the south, shapes started pushing through the deadfall. 5 at first, then more, tangled, stumbling, drawn by the sound and the number of living bodies suddenly in one place. The group reacted fast. Too fast to be inexperienced. Weapons came up. Positions tightened. One man swore loudly. That was a spark. The first shots weren't aimed at me. Rifles cracked, echoing off the ridge. Zombies dropped, then kept coming. Headshots were inconsistent. Stress ruins accuracy. Every shot pulled more of them in. I stayed inside until the dead breached the middle zone. That was my terrain. The entanglement slowed them, forced them to bunch up, forced the humans to reposition. One man tripped and went down hard, screaming. Bad sound. That scream brought more. That's when one of them fired toward the cabin. The shot hit the wall low, kicking splinters inside. That ended negotiation. I returned fire, not to wipe them out, but to break cohesion. One clean shot into a man's shoulder dropped him and forced the others to react. They scattered, some pulling back, some pushing forward without thinking. Zombies don't care who you're aiming at. The dead poured into the clearing now, funneled by the terrain I'd shaped. Humans and zombies collided inside the noise and the confusion. I watched when the group fired point-blank into a corpse only to be grabbed from behind. Another tried to run and fell into a pit trap I'd forgotten to disarm. I fired sparingly. Every round counted. Every shot was a decision. By the time the gunfire stopped, the clearing belonged to the dead. The survivors, 3 of them, maybe 4, pulled back hard, dragging wounded, abandoning equipment. They didn't look back. I didn't pursue. I stayed inside while the zombies milled around for hours, stuck in branches, wandering, moaning. By nightfall, they drifted off, chasing quieter sounds elsewhere. When it was over, the cabin still stood, but it wasn't invisible anymore. Someone out there knew this place was defended, knew someone had shaped the land, knew that holding this territory cost blood. From that moment on, I stopped thinking in terms of staying hidden. I started thinking in terms of whether holding ground was still worth it. Because once organized people mark a place on their mental map, they don't forget it. And next time, they wouldn't bring the dead with them by accident. They'd do it on purpose. They didn't come back the next day. That was how I knew it was a siege. If they'd been angry, they would have rushed me. If they'd been scared, they would have disappeared. Instead, the woods stayed wrong. Too quiet in some places, too active in others. Movement at the edges. Distant sound that didn't resolve into anything close. Pressure without contact. They were waiting. I took stock immediately. Not inventory like before, this was triage. Ammo first. I laid it all out on the bed and counted twice. Rifle rounds. Enough for maybe 2 dozen careful shots. Shotgun, less than that. Sidearm. A handful of magazines I'd hoped never to need. No reserves. No resupply. Every trigger pull now had a future cost. Water next. The tanks were still mostly full, but rain hadn't come in days, and I couldn't risk going out to the creek anymore. The group knew where it was. Anyone watching could see me break cover to get there. I reduced intake immediately. No unnecessary boiling. No washing that wasn't essential. I switched to single-cup meals and wiped cookware instead of rinsing it. Thirst is uncomfortable. Dehydration kills quietly. Food I could manage. Water set the clock. The first sign they were still there came that night. A single gunshot, far off to the north. Not aimed at me. Not close. Just enough sound to pull attention. I heard moaning start within minutes, echoing through the low ground. By midnight, the dead were moving again, more of them this time, drawn in from outside the area. I stayed dark and still, listening as they wandered to the outer zone and snagged themselves in the deadfall. That's when it clicked. They weren't trying to kill me directly. They were letting the dead do the work. Daylight showed me how patient they were. No approach, no voices, just occasional movement on the ridge, barely silhouettes, never staying long enough for a shot. I didn't fire anyway. Shooting at ghosts wastes ammo and teaches lessons I don't want taught. By the second night, the zombie traffic doubled. By the third, it tripled. They started staying longer now, tangled and moaning, piling up against the obstacles. The sound never stopped completely. Low, constant like insects. Sleep came in fragments. On the fourth day, water dipped lower than I liked. That forced decisions. I couldn't reach the creek. I couldn't count on rain. That left the tanks and whatever condensation I could collect. I rigged every container I had, metal cups, pans, plastic sheets angled to drip into bottles during the cooler hours. It helped, but barely. I started rationing harder. Dry mouth, headache, slower thinking. I caught myself staring at nothing more than once and forced my attention back. Siege isn't about bravery. It's about discipline under boredom and discomfort. That night, the group tested me. A flare went up just beyond the ridge, bright, sudden, unmistakable. It lit the trees for a second and died. Then another. They wanted to see if I'd move, if I'd shoot, if I'd give away where I was watching from. I didn't. Instead, I waited until the dead started pushing harder, drawn by the noise. When they were fully engaged with the entanglement zone, I used the last light of dusk to quietly dismantle part of my own inner defenses on the north side. That sounds backwards. It wasn't. I needed an exit that looked like a failure. Just before midnight, they made their real move. A herd came in from the west, driven, not wandering. Too organized, too fast. Someone was making noise out there, herding them toward the cabin like cattle. The dead hit the clearing in numbers I hadn't seen before. Bodies piling. Moaning turning into a constant wall of sound. Pressure against the obstacles increased until branches started snapping. I fired then. Carefully. One shot. One head. Only where it mattered. Where collapse would open space or redirect pressure. I wasn't defending the cabin. I was shaping movement. Through the slit, I saw them on the ridge again, watching, waiting for me to run out of bullets or water. They expected me to break. Instead, I did something worse for them. I left, not running, not panicking. I took the exit I'd opened earlier, slipping out the back while the dead pressed in front. I moved low, slow, downwind, using the noise to cover my movement. Zombies don't look back. Humans assume you'll flee straight out the front when cornered. I carried only what fit on my body. Rifle, water bottle. Enough food for 2 days. From the tree line, I stopped and looked back once. The cabin was still standing, lights off, surrounded by the dead. A perfect decoy. They'd stay focused on for days, thinking they were winning, thinking time was on their side. By the time they realized the territory was empty, I'd already be somewhere they hadn't mapped yet. Sieges only work if the defender stays put. I didn't. They figured it out faster than I hoped, slower than I feared. I knew the moment they did, even though I wasn't there to see it. You can feel it when pressure shifts. The woods change tone. Birds don't come back all at once. They test the silence first. That morning, nothing tested. Everything stayed gone. They'd reached the cabin and found it empty. At first, they would have assumed a body. People want closure. They would have checked inside, stepped over the debris, smelled the rot of the dead tangled outside, and thought, siege worked. But then they would have noticed what wasn't there. No blood inside. No signs of panic. No abandoned gear. No corpse. That's when it turns personal. I was already moving by then, pushing north through uneven ground, avoiding trails, crossing water whenever I could break scent in tracks. I didn't travel fast. Speed leave sign. I traveled deliberately. 10 minutes of movement, 5 of stillness. Long enough to listen. Long enough to let my breathing settle. By the second day, I found the first sign they were hunting me. Boot prints near a game trail I'd crossed that morning. Fresh. Careful. Someone had circled instead of following straight through. That told me they weren't desperate anymore. They were methodical. They'd split into teams. That's how organized groups hunt territory holders. One element follows sign. Another ranges wide, looking for secondary indicators, disturbed ground, broken spider webs, snapped stems that haven't dried yet. The third stays mobile, cutting off likely routes. I adjusted immediately. I stopped thinking about where I wanted to go and started thinking about where they thought I would go. North made sense on a map. More forest, fewer people. That meant they'd expect it. So I angled west instead, then doubled back south through a shallow ravine where water pooled just enough to mass tracks. I stayed off ridgelines. Ridgelines silhouette you. I moved just below them, where visibility drops but sound still carries. That night, I didn't light a fire. I found a natural hollow between two fallen trees, scraped out leaves with my hands, and wrapped myself in a tarp to hold heat. Hunger I could manage. Cold I could manage. Being seen I couldn't. Sometime after midnight, I heard voices. Not close, but not distant either. Carried on purpose. They weren't whispering. They wanted to be heard. That's a tactic. Let the hunted know you're there. Let imagination do the work. I didn't move. Moving at night when people are actively searching is how you walk into an ambush. Instead, I stayed still and let them pass downslope, their lights sweeping wide arcs through the trees. They were confident now. That confidence would cost them eventually. By the third day, they escalated. They started using noise. Gunshots spaced out, not aimed. Engines revving briefly, then cutting out. The idea was to flush me, force a reaction, make me choose between hiding and hydration. They knew I'd need water soon. They were right. By late afternoon, my mouth felt like cotton. Headache creeping in. That's when mistakes happen. I reached a creek just before dusk and waited a full hour before approaching it. Watched reflections. Watched insects. Listened. When I finally drank, I did it fast and upstream, then doubled back downstream through the water to break sign. That bought me time. It didn't lose them. On the fourth day, I saw them clearly. Two of them on a spur trail ahead, moving slow, scanning ground instead of horizon. Trackers. One more off to the side, overwatch, rifle ready. They were good. I backed away without turning, step by step, then angled downhill into thicker brush where line of sight collapsed. I crawled for 20 yards, then waited. Minutes passed. Then one of them entered the brush, exactly where I'd expected. He was cautious, but caution isn't invisibility. When he stepped over a fallen limb, his boot slipped just enough to shift weight. I moved then, not toward him, but away, using the sound to cover my retreat. I didn't want contact. Contact creates momentum. Still, they'd close the distance. That night, they lit another flare. Closer this time. I understood then that this wasn't about territory anymore. It was about control. They couldn't allow someone to contest ground and disappear. That invites challenge. So I stopped running. I chose the ground instead. I found a narrow saddle between two rises. Thick brush on both sides. Rocky underfoot. Bad for moving fast. Worse for spreading out. Perfect for forcing people into each other's space. I set two simple traps, not to kill, just to disrupt. Noise, pain, confusion. And then I waited. Just before dawn they came. 4 of them this time. Tight formation. Tired but focused. One of them triggered the first trap. A snapped ankle or at least a bad fall. Shouting followed. Swearing. That's when the dead arrived. They always do. The noise carried farther than they expected. Zombies filtered in from both sides, drawn toward the bottleneck. The group fired instinctively. Breaking formation, attention split between me and the dead. I fired once. One man went down. That was enough. I didn't stay to see how it ended. I moved while chaos covered me, slipping downslope into thicker woods, letting the living and the dead sort each other out. By the time the sun came up, I was miles away. They were still alive out there. I knew that. Groups like that don't disappear easily. But they also knew something now. I wasn't prey. I was a problem. And problems don't need to be chased forever, just far enough to make them someone else's. I didn't expect it to happen like this. I'd been careful. I'd been patient. I'd avoided them for weeks, moving only when I had cover, crossing water to break scent, sleeping in hollows under fallen trees, rationing every drop of water, every calorie. And yet, here they were. I smelled them before I saw them. Smoke, drifting on the wind, not from a fire I'd started, from a small camp, low and hidden, but enough to give away presence. They were waiting. Maybe they'd figured out the pattern of my movement. Maybe they'd cornered me by accident. I didn't care. I counted. 5 of them. 3 rifles, 2 shotguns. They weren't spreading out. They were in tight formation, moving deliberately toward a small ridge where I had high ground. I had one choice: fight on my terms or die running. I crouched behind a fallen log and looked over my plan. The ridge was steep, rocky, and partially covered by pine saplings. That's all I needed. I didn't have the numbers. I didn't have reinforcements. But I had the terrain, traps, and patience. I set up 3 simple noise traps first. Branches wired to stones, placed in choke points. Nothing lethal, just enough to startle or slow them. One I dug shallow, hidden just under the leaf litter. Another was a tangle of fallen limbs and vines arranged so someone running would trip. The third was a small, sharpened stake I anchored at knee height in a narrow trail. Minimal risk for me, maximum disruption for them. I positioned myself just beyond the ridge crest, low, with rifle trained, sidearm ready, and enough water and rations to last a couple more days if this went wrong. Then I waited. They came. The first man tripped over the wire trap I'd laid. Noise snapped through the ridge. He swore. Instinctively, 2 others paused to check him. The 4th tried to go around the trap and hit the tangle. A branch snapped. A foot slid on loose gravel. And that's when the dead arrived. I hadn't led them here. Not directly. But the wind carried the sound of struggle, the snapping of traps and the faint scent of blood. Zombies don't think. They move toward stimulus. Within minutes, 5 of them were moving through the brush at the edge of the ridge. More emerged from the valley below. They weren't organized. They weren't fast. They were unstoppable. Chaos became a weapon. I fired once into a man's shoulder. He went down hard. Screaming, the others spun, distracted by both him and the dead pressing up the ridge. Another man fell over the sharpened stake. One stumbled into the tangle, arms flailing. 2 more tried to regroup and fired at the zombies instead of me. I didn't move. I let them compress together. Their fire was wild. The dead closed in. Screams filled the trees. Branches snapped. Gravel shifted underfoot. I waited for the opening, breathed slow, and made each shot count. Headshots only. 1 more hit, and a man went down, this time permanently. By the time the sun broke fully over the ridge, 3 of them lay dead. 2 were retreating, dragging the wounded, screaming at the dead to get off. The rest were scattered in the brush, injured or panicked. I didn't pursue. I had no desire to finish it for the thrill. I only needed it over. I slipped down the ridge while they were distracted, moving silently, letting the dead and their confusion cover me. The ridge itself would funnel any of them back toward the chaos if they tried to follow. I didn't stop until the smell of smoke and blood faded behind me. By mid-afternoon, I paused in a small ravine and looked back once. The ridge was littered with the aftermath. Broken trees, toppled limbs, scattered bodies, living and dead tangled together. I counted myself alive. That's all that mattered. That day, I realized something important. Victory in this world isn't about numbers or skill or weapons alone. It's about space, patience, and forcing others to make mistakes you can exploit. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. I just kept moving, staying low, staying quiet, making sure the next time someone came looking, I'd be even harder to find. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to think about the next stop. Somewhere the dead weren't thick yet. Somewhere the living hadn't decided territory. Somewhere I could survive, because I knew now for certain. The cabin, the ridge, the traps, they were never permanent. They were temporary shields in a world that doesn't forgive holding ground too long. I was alive. That was all that counted. That's it for today's story. We will love to see you again soon. Thanks for listening, and most importantly, stay safe out there.